so, you know, really tough if your kids have 2 copies. That's very tough. Okay, so that is our little AP complexa, and that's going to finish our protist, you guys. So, you know, you want to be able to make sure that you can identify the protists on the slides, be able to recognize whether they're going to be found in the blood or in the intestines. If they're arthropod borne, you want to be able to describe the arthropods and how they're transferred from one to another. Okay, and I know this is so much, you guys, but we're just going to go ahead and push ahead into chapter 21. And we're going to try to get quite a bit done today. I don't know if that's unfortunate, but that way it'll give us a little bit more time on Thursday. So chapter 21 starts on page 177. You guys will see that it's helmets. Another name for helmets, we can think of helmets and worms. A great topic right before lunch. And arthropod vectors. Yeah, oh boy. So let's tackle the arthropod vectors first, because these will be easiest. We've introduced you to a lot of these already. So let's start with these arthropod vectors. And on the handout today, the handout, this handout was created by Professor Meyer and Professor Holland. Just to get you oriented here, the first few pages are on worm life cycles, which we'll be going over today. Wonderful lunchtime conversation. And then the last 2 pages are from Professor Holland, where she downloaded images from Google. And if you'll turn to the very last page, she has some diagrams of some arthropods and some examples of some of the arthropod vectors. So first of all, arthropods, they all belong to kingdom Animalia, so they are animal, multicellular organisms. What makes arthropods really cool, arthro means jointed, and pod means feet. Okay, so they have jointed legs. And in addition, they have a hard exoskeleton. Instead of having an endoskeleton like humans do, they have a tough protective exoskeleton. And one of the components that makes the exoskeleton so tough is chitin. And you guys will remember from our discussion of chapter 2 and also in chapter 4 that chitin is a polymer of N-acetylglucosamine. Okay? So that's what gives the crunch when you step on a cockroach and it goes crunch. It's the chitin in the exoskeleton. I don't like cockroaches, you guys. I just have no problem stepping on them. So crunch, the chitinous crunch there as I step on those cockroaches. Okay. Now it turns out that we will consider 2 major groups of arthropods. There's more, but we're just going to consider 2 groups as far as vectors. And vectors are, when we're talking about arthropod vectors are arthropods that can transfer pathogens from one host to a new host. Okay, so they're little delivery vehicles, right? And so amongst the arthropod vectors, there's 2 major groups that we'll discuss, the insects and the arachnids. And one simple test to distinguish an insect from an arachnid is if you look at the adults. Okay, so if we look at an adult insect has 3 pairs of legs for a total of 6 legs total. In contrast, arachnids, and it's important, you guys, we stress in adults because some arachnids have multiple stages. Adult arachnids always have 4 pairs of legs for a total of 8 legs. And you might say, oh, that just seems like so trivial. Why is that important? Well, sometimes when you're trying to investigate, say, an outbreak of arthropod-borne disease and you're trying to look for potential vectors, it is important whether you know that this is an insect you're examining or an arachnid that you're examining. Okay, so with regard to insect vectors that we'll be discussing, we have mosquitoes. Okay, so help me out here, guys. Which type of mosquitoes are the vectors for Plasmodium? Anopheles, right? Yeah. And we wanted to explain why it's only the females. It turns out amongst mosquitoes, usually it's only the females that are bloodsuckers, and we can come up with all kinds of jokes about that, right? But the females, because they are going to be the bearers of the eggs, takes a lot of nutrients to make all those eggs. So the female mosquitoes, they need really rich nutrient-rich meals, and blood is a great nutrient-rich meal for them. The males, because they don't have to develop so many of the eggs, because they don't develop the eggs, they can survive off of nectar and pollens. Yeah, so we have this, you know, just totally nerdy thing in our house. If we see mosquitoes, we're like, which sex are they? If they're females, we're like, go. Yeah. Okay, so mosquitoes. So we said mosquito, Anopheles mosquitoes transfer the protozoan Plasmodium. Is there another viral pathogen here in California we worry about mosquitoes transferring? A virus that we worry about mosquitoes transferring here in California?
Yellow fever.
Okay, one that's endemic, it's newly brought to California in the last like 10 years. And I think you guys said, I just think West Nile virus, right? So we were about malaria, we were about West Nile virus. And in addition, you guys, when we talk about worms, mosquitoes can also transfer a group of worms that are called filarial worms. So we're going to look at a filarial worm called Bullseye Rash. They can, the vector are mosquitoes. So mosquitoes can even transfer worms. Now luckily we don't have what's called the lymphatic filarial worm, the Bullseye Rash here in California. But we have related filarial worm, dog heartworm. Oh. And those of you that have dogs, you probably know your vet has you test your dog for heartworms, have you give your dogs preventive medicines so that the dogs don't develop their own filarial worm disease. And again, it's transferred by mosquitoes. Okay. So mosquitoes, wow, they're good. And then a lot of you were saying like yellow fever virus. That is totally correct. Mosquitoes transfer yellow fever virus. They transfer dengue virus, which is an emerging infectious disease here in the United States. So viruses, mosquitoes are great arthropod vectors. Now another example of an insect arthropod vector, because we're focused on insects here. And let me just go to your list in your chapter 21. So on page 180, I'll just starting right now. I'm starting with number 6. We'll just list those arthropod vectors that you guys are going to take a look at. We already mentioned the mosquitoes, number 6. Number 7 is the rat flea. And this is another one we have here in California. So fleas are the vectors for a serious bacterial disease here in California. The bacterium Yersinia pestis, which causes which infectious disease? Okay, here in California, we are endemic. Our rodents in certain parts of the states carry Yersinia pestis. Which disease does Yersinia pestis cause? Makes you love living here in California. How about, let me see here. It was called the Black Death in Europe. Plague, yeah, bubonic plague, yeah. So we're endemic for bubonic plague, yeah. It was introduced around the turn of the century into San Francisco, and then it spread through the rodents. So there are, especially in the Sierras, a lot of the rodent populations carry Yersinia pestis. And that's why you have to be careful when you're backpacking or camping. You don't want to lay your sleeping bag down, your rodent burrow. Because what happens, the fleas bite the rodents. They take a blood meal. And it's really kind of cool the way the bacteria do this. The bacteria replicate in the intestinal tract and create a blockage. So that when the flea, I can't say this right, when the flea feeds, the intestinal tract is blocked, so it can't absorb the nutrients from the blood meal, and it starts to starve, and it becomes frantic, and it's hopping around, you know, biting anything that's warm and moves. And so when it reaches a new host, say a person, it bites us, and it tries to suck up the blood, right, but it can't absorb the nutrients, so it regurgitates, it vomits the bacteria into the bite wound. Don't you just love this stuff, you guys?
Oh, that's so gross.
Yeah, okay, so that's how we get infected. Now, here in California, you have to be really careful. If you guys live up in the, like the Lake Tahoe region, this was several years ago, but a woman up in the Tahoe region died from pneumonic plague. And what they think happened is, if you have kitty cats up in the Lake Tahoe region, the cats might catch the sick rodents, right, that are dying of plague themselves. So the cat catches the rodents, the fleas bite the cats, what happens with plague, the plague bacterium, it can circulate from the bite to your lungs, and it can start growing in your lungs, and then you have pneumonic plague. So when you cough or sneeze, your cough or sneeze plague bacteria into the face of other organisms. So they think what happened was this lady's cat developed pneumonic plague. And of course, you know, her kitty cat's sick, so she's cradling him, and the cat's coughing and sneezing in her face. And then she developed pneumonic plague, and she died.
Oh.
So be careful up in the Tahoe region, you guys. If you have cats, be careful of that. So the vets up there have to, the veterinarians have to be really careful of coughing, sneezing cats up there. They're like, oh my God, I heard the plague. Okay. I mean, California's a wonderful place to live, you guys. We have lots of infectious diseases. Okay, so those are the fleas. We go down to number 8, you guys. It's the Glossina fly. And who does Glossina? What does Glossina? Vector.
Is it the TT fly?
Yeah, right. Glossina is the TT fly. But again, you guys, make sure you can recognize TT fly or Glossina. Okay, and who? What is Glossina vector? Trypanosoma brucei, right, which causes African trypanosomiasis or sleeping sickness. Good. Now remember, we've got a Glossina fly on the demo scope. There are also good ones in your micro 8 boxes. Very good, you guys. Okay, and then we'll work our way down there to the last one on page 8. Oh, I should put this up there. Okay, so we have Glossina. And what's the last one on page 8 there, you guys? The reduvid bugs, also called the triatoma bugs, also called the assassin bugs, also called the kissing bugs.
A lot of names.
A lot of names. And remember, this is one that Professor Wyatt taught. What does the reduvid bugs vector? Trypanosoma cruzi, right? Very good. So these are the ones that transfer Trypanosoma cruzi, the cause of American trypanosomiasis of Chagas disease. They have been finding Trypanosoma cruzi in donated blood in Southern California, so it is of concern here. And blood banks are screening blood now for Trypanosoma cruzi. You can also get, oh, you're going to love this, you guys. They've had cases in Brazil where, and I don't know how to say it right, you guys, acai berries? I know I'm saying that wrong. Acai berries, right? Okay, really good stuff full of antioxidants. Well, in Brazil, they've had cases where they've harvested the acai berries, and infected triatoma bugs have been amongst the berries, and they juice them, and so they've had people get infected with Trypanosoma cruzi by drinking unpasteurized acai berry juice. So these guys, the trypanosomes are really, they can get into our bodies a lot of different ways, yeah. And what they tend to do, they tend to replicate in cardiac muscle, so chronic infections, end up congestive heart failure. They replicate in the smooth muscle cells of intestines, so you end up with megacolon, megaesophagus. Ugh, yeah, not a good way to go. So we want to be careful of that one. Okay. Now, the only arachnid we have for you guys to look at, and I did the insects first. On page 180, if you go up to number 5, it says observe the dermacenter tick. Okay, so we want to remember that ticks, as adults, they have 4 pairs of legs, so they're arachnids. Okay, so we'll just put ticks here. And the tick that I would actually like you guys to remember, it's because it's such an important vector here in California, it belongs to a different genus. It's called Ixodes. And this is the genus of ticks that is the vector for Lyme disease. And Lyme disease is caused by a bacterial spirochete, a big name, Borrelia burgdorferi. So I would like you to know this for the lab practical, and of course we have it here in California, Borrelia burgdorferi. And these ticks, they prefer moist areas. So along the coast, they're a big issue along the coast. If you go hiking in the Point Reyes area, the Humboldt area, be careful, you guys, because there's lots of Lyme disease carrying ticks there. Again, they don't like dry environments, so they often are found hanging out at the base of trees where it's shady, just where you like to sit when you're hiking. They love to be there. So the spirochete, Borrelia burgdorferi, it is really interesting. If we get infected by being bitten by a tick, if you're lucky, you'll see this classic, what's called a bullseye rash. So, yeah, if you're lucky, because if you see this bullseye rash, areas of white and red, go right to the doctor, because that's an early sign of Lyme disease. I'll put it here. The problem is sometimes you're infected and you don't get a bullseye rash, and then you might not go for therapy. And the problem with untreated Lyme disease, it looks a lot like untreated syphilis, which is also caused by a bacterial spirochete. From the bite wound, the bacterium can migrate to the joints and cause arthritis, and in some cases it migrates to the central nervous system and can cause neurological damage. And just like syphilis, if you've been infected a long time and finally somebody diagnosed you, sometimes if you've been infected for a long time, antibiotic therapy won't help you anymore, like the damage is permanent. So that's why it's so important, if you think you've been bitten by a Lyme disease tick, if you can, you guys, try to collect the tick. In the old days when we still had money, public health departments would actually test the ticks to see if they had Lyme disease, right? But if you can, you see that you have a tick, and the concern is if they've been feeding for more than 24 hours. It usually takes 24 hours for them to transfer the bacterium to you. So if it's a recent bite, like you were just out hiking today, you do your tick inspection at night, so you know that tick is maybe feeding on you only for a few hours, you're probably fine. The problem is if you were out hiking, say Sunday, and you notice this tick feeding on you on Thursday, if it was carrying Lyme disease, that was ample time for it to transfer the bacterium. And I don't know, I don't think they stay attached that long, but they need 24 hours for the bacterium to transfer, right? Okay. And so that's why it's important here in California, when you go hiking at night, you should always try to do a really good tick check, because we've got a lot of Lyme disease here in California. Okay, so that's the only tick. Now, the slides in your boxes are Dermacenter, but again, Professor Wyatt, he just rocks and roll. Professor Holland got these for us. Professor Wyatt collected the Ixodes pacifica. It's called the western black-legged tick here in California. Back east, they have another species. It's called Ixodes scapularis. I think it's called the eastern deer tick. But rodents are the most important reservoir of Borrelia burgdorferi here in California. Back east, deer are more important. Here, it's more of a rodent problem. Okay, so we'll set up a dissecting scope with the Ixodes ticks just so you can see them. And on the lab exam, you guys, I wouldn't ever ask you to identify Ixodes versus Dermacenter, but I would want you to recognize that they're ticks, and that ticks are the vectors for Lyme disease here in California. Okay? All right. Now, I know this is so tough, you guys, but I want to get us started on at least 1 or 2 worms, just to make it easier on Thursday. Okay? Because hopefully I'll return the lab exams on Thursday, and usually there's a lot of discussion over that. So let's see if we just can't